When did you fall in love with movies?
Oh gosh, when I was a little kid, movies were always a big part of my family's life, my life. My grandfather was a projectionist in the Nickelodeon days when he was a little boy in Times Square. And he became one of the early union projectionists in New York. He worked at all the big theaters that were kind of like the fancy show places, Loewy's Paradise, and all of these theaters that were really like something spectacular to everyone back then. And it was an event to go to a movie. And so he was a projectionist. And when my father came of age, he wanted to be in the movies. And he didn't really want to be a projectionist like my grandfather. And my father was introduced to editing. And he thought that seemed pretty interesting. And he became an editor at a very young age. And so movies have always just permeated my entire existence. We went to the movies, my grandparents took me to the movies, my father and mother took me to the movies. And I went with my brother and our friends, and it was just something that, was the ultimate escape and entertainment and enjoyment. And I certainly thought that that would be a wonderful thing to do if I ever had the opportunity to do it.
Did you know you wanted to be in front of the camera, behind the camera, post-production? Like what, did you have an idea?
Well, I think unlike a lot of editors, I did want to be in front of the camera. I actually spent a year at acting school when I was older and we had moved to Los Angeles. I studied with Bill Traylor and Peggy Fury at the Loft Studio, which I think Sean Penn and Michelle Pfeiffer went to. They were actually a fairly well-regarded teaching facility there. Over on La Brea. Maritzka Hargitay was in my class, actually, and she was just a kid out of UCLA, or in UCLA at the time. And so I studied for a year, and the way I looked at it was, no matter what, this will be valuable to my career as a filmmaker, to understand the actor's process. But yeah, I thought it would be fun to be in front of the camera. I was always kind of a ham when I was a kid, and but that's a tough road also. So I kind of veered more towards behind the camera, got some opportunities. I had moved out when I was really young, so I had to figure out a way to support myself. So I kind of veered into camera work to a certain extent. I worked at a camera rental house. It was very interesting to me. I had worked with camera since I was a kid also, photography, my own darkroom, developing black and white and then color with the old enlarger and analog chemicals and things like that. And so I thought, I kind of played with that idea for a while. And I worked on a couple of shoots, a couple of non-union, small, independent things. And I quickly came to the decision that that wasn't for me. It just seemed like brutal work on set. Those people work really hard. And not that we editors don't, but those are long days and there's a lot of sitting around. And also being on the road. People who work in the camera departments have to be on the road quite a bit. And I didn't think that was going to fit my personality. I was kind of more like a homebody. I didn't want to be traveling, 3 or 4 times a year to do pictures. So, and also I had an opportunity in editing because of my father. So after exploring these, different routes, I got a job in his shop as first as a driver and a PA and making coffee. I mean, I started at the bottom even working for him. I mean, that's just the way it works in the industry. I guess maybe unless your father's the head of the studio or something like that.
And so at that time, they were splicing and cutting and,
Yes,
and
we
using
were,
Nagras and things like that.
absolutely. We were working on film, 35 millimeter film. And again, this was something that, you know, was around from the time I was a relatively small child. I don't know if anybody remembers, there were film trim bins, and they used to hang the film. I'm sure everybody's seen it in the movies. And my father used to put me in one of those trim bins when I was a little boy. I mean, you know, 3, 4 years old, to keep me from getting into trouble in his office. But I used to go to work with him all the time in New York City, and watch and hang out with the editors there, men and women that were working with him and for him. He had a really big shop at one time. I think he had almost 40 editors working for him, and he was making you know, some of the biggest commercials of that time. He created a company called Cinemetric, which was the first integrated post-production house in New York. He actually came up with the idea that producers would come to editorial to post their commercials, but then he kind of came up with the idea and said to these producers, well, why would you take it somewhere else for sound editing and sound mixing, and then opticals, which are now digital effects, and finishing. So he kind of packaged the whole thing, and I think that's pretty much the way it works to this day.